Hi, I am Chris Bailey, and I am about to have a productive conversation with the one, with the only, Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and we are here with another Flashback Friday episode. This time we're revisiting a conversation that I had with Chris Bailey about his book, Hyperfocus. The reason I chose this is, well, number one, I recently reread the book for my Time Crafting Trust Premium Book Club, which is just one of the benefits of the Time Crafting Trust community. But also, it was time to catch up with Chris to see what had been going on recently. I mean, I know he's written the book, How to Calm Your Mind. We wanted to touch on that and maybe get a sense of what the journey's been since Hyperfocus, because it's been a while since that book came out. This conversation was actually part of a larger conversation, this update that is, that I had with the book club when Chris joined us to discuss Hyperfocus, which was a real blast. And I'm so grateful that he took the time not just to give me an update, but to share his thoughts and insights and answer questions with members of my community. So thanks to Chris for that. And now let's just jump into my updated conversation, the most recent conversation I had with my good friend, Chris Bailey. So first off, the journey since Hyperfocus, which came out, like we mentioned, 6 years ago. 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago now. What's been the journey since Hyperfocus? I mean, How to Calm Your Mind came out. That was one of it. But that came out last year, I think, right? Didn't it?
Oh, time is just a construct, Mike Vardy. I actually have no clue when these things came out. So when you said Hyperfocus came out in 2018, I just believed you. I feel I've seen that number connected to the book. Everything's a blur. But from the time the first book that I wrote, which is called The Productivity Project, came out, it's all been kind of this timeline where a book is very weird because you write the book, and when the proposal is done, you feel, okay, the book is written in my mind. And then you sit down, you write the book, you put you allow the 70,000-80,000 words to travel from your brain through your arms, down through your fingers into your word processor of choice. Then it goes through this Rube Goldberg kind of contraption that is the traditional publishing industry that's out in the world. And by the time it's out in the world, it's like, okay, the book is done. It can help people out now. Now, what am I up to next? But then, of course, that's where the work on that book begins, because you do all these interviews. I think Hyperfocus is out in 30 some languages. And so there's all the international interviews. There's a lot of different things to juggle and all that kind of stuff. And so the journey for that book kind of started after it came out, but the other half of my brain was focusing on, okay, what else is interesting and would be helpful for people out there. So, the Calm book on how, less stimulated mind also lets us focus more deeply. The book after that, which I was just actually writing it before we hopped on the horn here. My 5,000 words left to go on the home stretch for that, and so we'll go through the process for that again. It's just having fun and connecting ideas that are hopefully helpful to people, I guess, is the short answer.
Now, before we get to those that are here and their questions, I have one more, because I think it's as a writer myself.
Yeah.
We actually had this conversation in the mastermind we were part of, and this was like a while back. But I remember I asked you, so what if you have an idea that comes to you in the book that you're writing, and it feels like it could be connected, but it's going to be like, it could be an entirely like new book altogether. And what you said to me at the time was, and again, I'm hopefully remembering this right, was, I try to find a way to fit it into the book I'm writing, as opposed to just going, okay, that idea is for another book. So can you talk a bit about that? Because I think it's a lot of people, when they're writing, they go, okay, well, that's a different idea, so that's going to be a different book. But you're like, nope, this lives here. So how do I make sure that it lives here and lives here well?
Yeah, I love that question, because I feel, when a lot of people write a book, they're focusing on kind of like the market and selling a lot of copies and stuff like that. That doesn't cross my mind basically once when I write something.
Mm.
And so the filter that I use is like these ideas that arise as I'm writing something, are they helpful and are they interesting? And if they're one or the other, it's like, okay, might work for the, but if it's both, then it definitely goes in the book. And it's not as though, over this journey of writing these books as this author guy, that ideas have dried up on some level. There's always more ideas around the corner. And I think the more you get out of your head and the less you save, the more actual room there is for more new ideas to arise. And so, for all these reasons and more, whenever I go into a writing project or a project of almost any kind, I'm always thinking, like, okay, like if I'm doing a talk, imagine this is the last talk I will ever do. How does that mindset change the talk that I'm giving? If I'm writing a book, imagine this is the last book I'm ever going to write. And it changes the ideas and it actually makes the project higher leverage. Because who knows, maybe it will be the last book I ever write, in which case I'll have minimized regret. So much of what I do is just part of a regret minimization framework of just optimizing around that. But just leave it all on the table. This does come back um, to bite me sometimes. So a few months ago, I was off in Poland doing a talk, and they gave me 15 minutes. It was to a lot of people, I think 5,000 people or something. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna put it all in the talk, all my good like nuggets and helpful stuff, and it's gonna be like a concentration of just goodness. And then like I'm gonna do all my greatest hits, kind of, right?
Hmm.
And then a month after that, they said, "Oh, we loved your last talk. Um, so we're going to invite you to come give another." And I thought, oh man, okay,
You have to play your
I'm gonna have
rarities
to
and
come up.
B-sides. You got to play your rarities and B-sides,
Yeah,
Chris.
exactly. It's so it's like, okay, it did come back to bite me that one time, but I guess the books are more helpful because of it. So it's a net win.
Hey, can you really quickly? This brings me back to the idea of like the last talk and the greatest hits and stuff. What was that Ben Folds
Yeah.
song that you love? Remember that we the one about the record
Oh.
deal. Remember you were talking about like,
Oh yeah, one down,
yeah.
3.6 to go. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
can you tell a story about that really quickly? I think it's a really interesting one for those, like, because it's the idea of he had an album, like he had a deal, right? And writers can come into
Yeah.
this issue as well. I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
writers can come into this as well.
Well, he had some like record deal, if I'm getting the story correct, where he had a deal to write like 3 or 4 albums,
Yeah.
or like a whole album or something. And it got to the point where it was just monotony. He was creating for the sake of creating. He was on that kind of creator's treadmill and just pooping them out at some point. And so he wrote a song called "One Down," I think is what it's called. And the chorus is like "One down, 3.6 tomorrow, and I'm out of here." And the song is about the fact that he had to write the song. And so it's this great kind of meta piece of work. And I think about it often whenever I have to do something that I don't want to do. Fortunately, that comes up less and less, but it's kind of my own mantra. Um, One down, 3.6 tomorrow, and it's a good song.
Yeah.
It's actually like, but I think it's a good example of how you can get out over your skis a little bit and think, okay, the next book will have this, and maybe this idea can fit in the book that's two after this. But what if nobody wants to read the next book because you didn't leave it all on the table to begin with? So it's just kind of echoing the same message on some level, I think.
Thanks to Chris for taking time out of his busy schedule to share an update with me and an update with you as well as have that conversation with my Time Crafting Trust premium members who were taking part in the book club benefit of that membership. Now let's get into the original conversation around Hyperfocus. Here it is, my conversation with Chris Bailey on this episode, a Flashback Friday episode. Enjoy. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Mike Vardy, it's a pleasure to be here. How are you, man?
I'm doing really well. We had a chance to chat just before we jumped on to record, and it's been a while since we spoke. I mean, the productivity project's been out. When did the productivity project come out? Let me take a look. It came out in, oh
It
my
was
goodness,
January
January 2016.
2016.
So
Yeah. Man,
two and
time
a half
flies,
years
doesn't
ago. It's craziness.
man. I
And you've got a new
feel
book. You've got
slightly
a new
older.
book.
Yeah, I
You-
do. I
It's
do. It
called
came out yesterday.
It's called Hyperfocus: How to Be More Productive in a World of Distraction. And to me, I would say that if we're going to have a guest on the show that talks about productivity, this would be a good. You would be a good guest, and this would be a good book to talk about because the biggest thing that a lot of people that I deal with, clients, et cetera, struggle with, and an audience is this fact that the world isn't just moving at a rate of speed that is hard to kind of just deal with. But then the distractions are just numerous. What was the impetus for you to say, I'm going to dive deep into this particular area of my work? Because I mean, your site's a life of productivity. You know, there's a lot
Yeah.
of productivity stuff that you could, but why did you say, hey, you know what, this is an area that I think that I want to kind of, go into great depth?
Honestly, it was seeing myself struggle through these issues that I write about in the book. You mentioned the first book, The Productivity Project, and during the writing process, as I'm sure you're aware with, you're so focused on what you're creating and to get it out into the world, and you want to work toward that end result. And eventually, there's the point at which the book was out into the world, and it was doing well, it was selling well, the audiobook was doing well, it was translated into a number of languages, but then I found myself with significantly less to do over the course of the day. There are interviews and things like that. But I found that it's Parkinson's law, classic productivity rule, Parkinson's law, where my work was expanding to fit how much time I had available for its completion. And so, because of that, what was expanding wasn't the important work I was doing every day. It was the distractions that I tended to. It was doing busy work. It was checking email more often. It was not taking my own advice that I had been giving for a couple of years up to that point. So I thought, okay, if I'm struggling with this, somebody who calls himself a productivity expert, quote unquote, maybe other people are too. So I started, it was kind of like another deep dive project in that way where I thought, okay, why is this the case? Not just, of course, distractions are distracting, it's right in the name, but why on a neurological level are they distracting? And can we work back from the science and make that science practical so that we can work differently and better and more productively every day? So that was my intention, to create a book that was sort of an antidote to living in this world of constant distraction and interruption. And it was kind of selfish in a way. It was just as much for myself as it was for anyone who would happen to pick it up.
Well, what's the saying? Write the book that you want to see in the world, right? Write the book that you need to
Yes,
read,
exactly.
right? Right.
Yeah, and whenever you find yourself, I think, given advice without taking that advice, it's a good signal that there's something deeper there, I think. So I think that was the impetus for putting this book out.
So you look at the cover, great cover, by the way, and you see
Oh, thank you.
hyper focus. And a lot of people are like, to me, it creates like this anxiety a little bit, like,
It's
I'm
very
someone that's
red.
in the space. Well, the cover's red. There's the arrow pointing in a very focused direction. It's called hyper focus. And I talk about
Yeah.
hyper scheduling, which to me, I actually, it's funny. David Sparks talks about hyper scheduling as well, but he talks about it in the positive sense. I talk about hyper scheduling, how it can be, if you hyper schedule yourself, then you could run the risk of being overscheduled and overwhelmed. Whereas, and I'm looking, when we go through your book, I want to talk about like how, if someone's looking at this going hyper focus, that sounds intense, like
Sounds intense.
it's
Yeah.
too much. Can you break it
Yeah.
down a little bit so that people can understand, hey, look, this isn't about you going, it's not about like, being super caffeinated and like just
Yeah.
super driven. It's about, it's a very different, a very different kind of idea of what focus, what type of focus it is.
But I think that's an idea that I keep coming back to in my own research, and I know you do too, that productivity is not about doing more, 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 faster, faster, faster. It's about doing the right things and doing those things deliberately and with intention. And honestly, between us, Mike, and I'd imagine a few listeners,
hyperfocus was the best word that I could come up with to call this attentional state where we are totally immersed in what we're doing. It's kind of like flow in that way. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's idea, who's this renowned psychologist. But hyperfocus is the process by which we get into a flow-like state where we become totally immersed in what we're doing. And so that's what I really like to cover. It's very catching, and I hope people pick it up at the bookstore because of that reason. But that was simply the case. Is in practice though, hyperfocus is it's slower and it's more deliberate and it's more thoughtful. I define the 4 steps that again is based on the process by which we usually focus on something, and the first step to hyper focusing on something out of 4 is choosing something that is productive or meaningful to focus on. And so this is something that we don't do often enough, especially when we work on that autopilot mode that essentially we're working on hyperdrive, where we're just working fast and frantically instead of with that deliberateness and that intention. And I think it's a calmer day. If you think back to when you were the most productive, you probably weren't working fast and frantically. Maybe you were working a bit slower than usual, but you were working with a level of deliberateness and with intentionality that more than compensated for the speed at which you were working.
One of the things that I also love about your work, and there's some definite cohesiveness, is this idea of attention. And I think that people
Yeah.
get really hung up on time management, priority management, even to a certain degree, because most people, and we've read about this with Greg McEwen's book, Essentialism, like
Yeah.
priority was defined as just the next thing, not, there's no such thing as the word priorities, right? So I want to
Yeah.
talk a bit about that. You talked about attentional space. People have probably heard about intentional space, and
Yeah.
you and I are very much in sync with productivity is about intention plus attention. I think that's
Oh,
clear.
yeah.
What is attentional space, and how can people navigate that? Because I think that's an area where, like you said, there's lots of distractions. There's a lot of things going on. Whenever we're in any kind of space, the chance of overwhelm creeping in is very high. How does someone
Yeah.
navigate themselves through attentional space?
Well, like you said, and I know, like you continue to say, attention without intention behind it's just wasted energy because you're not being thoughtful about what you focus on. But this idea of attentional space, and if you flip through the book, it's very visual. There's a lot of pictures. It's not a children's book by any stretch of anyone's imagination, but there had to be a way to bridge the research to how we can act differently every day. And there's this idea, not to nerd out. I feel like
No, you can
the
nerd out
folks
here.
who listen to the show
Yep.
are fellow productivity nerds. So there's this idea of our working memory capacity, which is how many ideas and things we can keep in our mind at one time. And the way that I illustrate that in the book is by this little circle that indicates our attentional space. And so if we try to cram too much into that, we overload our working memory capacity and our productivity falters because of that. And again, this is one of those ideas that it kind of reframed the way that I thought about a lot of ideas in ways that surprised me, like especially around multitasking. It's a common refrain that multitasking doesn't work, but I found that there are cases in which it does. So who is somebody to say that we can't walk while we chew bubblegum, while we listen to an audiobook, while we avoid the cracks in the sidewalk? Our attentional space is pretty full at that point. We can't really process more in the moment, but we can usually manage a few habits at one time. But it's when we begin to take on things that are have added complexity, like the most important tasks in our work, for example, they're important because they require more of us. They take more attention to do right. They take time, but also, like you said, time management doesn't matter in a world of distraction as much as attention management does. Most of us are pretty good at managing our time. We can manage a calendar. We can show up to meetings on time. But if we can't then focus on what we've scheduled or what we've intended to accomplish, then it doesn't matter as much as it did before. But essentially, the idea is we only have so much attention to give to the world around us in the moment. And there are a lot of books on how to be more productive in general and take on better tasks. And this book covers a bit of how to determine what's important, but it's really on that moment by moment basis that the rubber meets the road, that we're distracted, that we're interrupted. And so by managing this space better and defending it better by disabling distractions ahead of time, we can use our attention that much better too.
I had Ben Hardy on the show not too long ago, actually, about a month or so ago, a little bit more than that. And we talked about how his idea of willpower doesn't work. And you and I,
Yeah.
I do agree. I think willpower plays a role, but I don't think you can't rely on it solely. But he talked about environmental choices and creating an environment that allows for your work to flourish and for your productivity and
Yeah.
attention to be. You talk about that in the book as well, right? Like this idea of creating a space, not just this attentional space in terms of the mental component, but also the physical space. What are some of the things that you recommend people do when it comes to, and some of it is probably stuff they've heard before, maybe something that they may not have heard before. Turning off your phone, all that stuff, airplane mode, we get all that.
Yeah.
But what are some of the other things you found? Because you are an experimenter. What are some of the things you found that said, hey, this will also help you in ways that maybe you didn't think?
Yeah, the phone thing is actually a pretty curious one because the studies on that are. I've become one of these people who talks about studies all the time, but I love this. Is honestly one of my favorite parts about writing this book is the tactics, but how do they work? What's the science behind them? What studies have been conducted? And the ones on smartphones were actually pretty almost sad in a way. Because you see, I write out of coffee shops quite a bit whenever I'm hunkering down on a project, and you see people who are connecting with one another over coffee, and they flip their phone down on the table. But that is still, like you said, it's a cue in our environment that a world of distraction is just within our reach. And I read one study where they were at a coffee shop and they observed patrons of the coffee shop, which actually sounds kind of creepy now that like you can imagine somebody just watching you with a clipboard, noting every time you pick up your phone. But they found that people picked up their phone every 3 to 5 minutes. And so that was times when they shifted their attention away instead of letting it wander, for example, on how meaningful that relationship was. And they surveyed these people after, and they compared them to the coffee shop patrons that didn't have their phone on the table. And they found that the people with the phone on the table, they rated the conversation with whomever they were with as having less closeness to it, and that they weren't able to connect as deeply. And they even rated the quality of their relationship with that person lower. And so, the basis behind this study is the fact that the state of our attention determines the state of our life. If we cram it full of things, we're going to feel overwhelmed. And the less control we have over our attention, the less autonomy we have been shown to feel, the less we accept ourselves, the less happy we are, and even the less satisfied we are with our life. And the same is true with our kids, by the way. I don't have children yet. We're getting married in a year. So these things take time, but the kids rate their control over their own life as being lower, and they accept themselves less when they don't have as much control over their attention. But our environment, a smartphone is just one potential object of attention in our environment. So this is something that I would remind people to do, because I think we all know the best productivity tactics. But once you realize why, and once you realize the results of that distraction, like that your relationships are more shallow when your phone is nearby, you really begin to have the impetus for that drive to clean up that environment. So if you look around you in your office, wherever you might be happy to listening to this, every single thing in your environment can serve as a distraction. If you have your tablet open, if you have your phone nearby. But for me, I've used this research to my advantage because these things serve as cues that a world of distraction is away. So in my office, looking around, I've got my turtle Edward, who is basking on his rock. I turned the filter off so people didn't complain about the background audio. I have noise canceling headphones. I have no phone, no tablet nearby. And there's a meditation cushion, there's a piano, which are things that are less attractive than the work that I want to be doing. I think this is the key, is that what we see as a distraction is really just an object of attention that we can welcome into our attentional space that is more attractive in the moment than what we truly want to be accomplishing. And
Hmm.
so Facebook will always be a more attractive object of attention than a report we need to be writing. Twitter will always be a more attractive object of attention than a conversation we're having. And so I think that's the key is, look around you and think, okay, what around me is going to prevent me from doing this, like as Cal says, this deep work or getting into this, like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi says, getting into this flow-like state and is ultimately going to sabotage my productivity because we have trouble resisting distractions there's fascinating science behind that too, but it's our environment that makes a huge difference also.
Well, and as you're talking about this, I think it's important that people need to. I mean, as someone who meditates, and I don't meditate as much as I should, but I almost feel that you almost always have to meditate if you want to if you want to be properly paying attention to people. And what I mean by that is what meditation calls on you to do. So, for example, if you're meditating, you're supposed to basically leave your mind empty, right? It's supposed to any thought that comes to your mind, you're supposed to acknowledge that it's there and just let it go. Acknowledge it's there
Yeah.
and let it go. I feel you have to do that every single moment in the day at this point. Because, if you and I are talking right now, and I mean, I'll be honest, like you and I are talking and I have an appointment to go to after we're done here. And as we're talking, that part enters my head and goes, don't forget, you got an appointment. So I'm like, yeah, I know, I let it go. If I let myself focus on that appointment, which I'm not even in the moment of right now, then it's going to dilute the quality of the experience that you and I are having in a conversation, right? So I think that the tactics or the process of meditation, what you should be doing when you meditate, can be exceedingly helpful when you are not meditating if you want to, cultivate attention to where it should be paid, right?
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think you hit the nail on the head. Meditation has some fascinating science behind it. And the research shows that when we have a consistent meditation practice, we talk about this attentional space, which we use to work on things, and we fit tasks into our attentional space in the moment. And so by managing the space better, we manage our life better. We manage our reality better. But we have 30% more attention to give to the world around us when we meditate. And the beautiful part about meditation that I think is underrated is, of course, it sharpens our attention. We're able to bring more focus to what's around us. But it is a practice of holding a single intention in our mind, which is remarkably difficult to do in the moment. So when we're sitting on the meditation cushion, our intention the whole time is to focus on the breath. And then we lose grip over that intention when our mind gravitates to think about work or to think about a meeting or to think about an appointment or to remember some cringeworthy, stupid thing we said, yesterday or whatever
The
it
thing
might be, right?
Have you ever? Okay, so
Yeah.
here's an
Or
interesting
you
thing.
come up with like the perfect witty response to something that somebody said to you 2 weeks ago.
Or you've got this great idea that you want to capture in the moment, like you want to write it down,
Yeah.
and you feel like you can't. Like here's when I knew I was actually meditating properly, and when I knew that it worked, is if you're meditating and it's that part of your brain that is always, the primitive part of your brain that's trying to fire off triggers, right? And I remember sitting there, and all of a sudden I had a tickle on my cheek. Like, how sometimes you get because you're focusing on the breath and I've let go of all these thoughts, and all of a sudden my brain was fine. Like, fine, I'm going to create some sensations on your body and see how you deal with it. And so I remember having a little tickle on a cheek, like just a little one. How sometimes those happen.
Was it your wife
right?
or no?
No, it was
No,
not. It was just a random like spasm. How sometimes those happen. And I remember my brain going, you should scratch that. If you scratch it, it's going to stop. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to let it go. And it stopped. Without me scratching it, it completely stopped. And that's how I think, like that was the real aha moment where it was like, okay, There was a
Yeah.
physical sensation that was happening with me, and I chose to stick to the rules, quote unquote, and it worked. It didn't.
Yeah.
The sensation went away, and it moved on. And I think that our brains, especially again the amygdala, the primitive part, is always going, how do we keep you from accessing the deeper the prefrontal cortex, that higher reasoning? Because all that part of your brain wants to do is really just get by. Like, just, can we
Yeah.
just get by? And it's really, I think that there's a lot of, we know there's fascinating science behind all that. And
Yeah,
you
it's
talk about.
quite fascinating with the cues as well.
Mhm.
On meditation retreats, which I had the chance to attend
Which ones
a
have you
few when I
done?
was in the process. They were a 7 and a 10 day Vipassana extended
I've been
meditation retreat.
thinking I've been thinking about doing one of
They're
those. They actually have them on the
they're
island here too.
fantastic.
Yeah.
What a better, can you think of a better place than Victoria Island in the
No,
summertime?
I cannot. So what was it like? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because I think that's something that I've read about it, and I'm like, oh, that seems like, my son and I were talking about it, and he goes, you know, there's people who I've heard that have done it that have just started crying because they can't do anything. Like, it's just such a sensory deprivation overload. Like, it's just a crazy experience. What was yours
It,
like?
it, it's remarkable because you begin to really sharpen your focus over the course of however long you do it. I think my first one was 3 or 4 days, which is it's a nice beginner length. It's not so
Hmm.
intimidating as these 7 or 10 day ones. But we talk about the cues in our environment, and I think I write about this in the book a little bit, where we are present. You notice this on an extended meditation retreat, where you notice that your mind has been distracted, but then you find that you're able to draw the path of distraction back to the original cue that set it off. And it
Hmm.
just goes to show how our minds are wired for distraction. So, you would hear a bird chirping outside, which would remind you of the bird in the square when you were in Paris 3 years ago. And then your mind goes off to the trip of Paris. And I was there with Kelly. I wonder what she's up to. I should check her face. And then you notice that you're in this well of distraction. It's like, holy crap, how did I get here? But you begin to draw things back. And if a bird can set you off, then imagine how your smartphone could. But the remarkable thing about the meditation practice is, not only does it expand your attentional space, not only does it allow you to better defend that space and resist distraction, but it's just this beautiful way of living your life. Like you said, what is, I think any moment that we don't have an intention behind what we're doing is a wasted moment.
Hmm.
And so after you choose that productive or meaningful object of attention, that first stage of hyperfocus, and you tame the external and internal distractions which prevent you from getting into it, then you focus on what you're doing and you continually draw your attention back to it, which is the fourth step, the third and fourth step. And so it's kind of like a meditative practice in a way, where you have your intention to focus on something. You eliminate the distractions so that you're able to accommodate that intention within that working memory capacity in the moment. So you can carry that intention with you as you go about your day, as you go about your work, and continually draw your attention back. I would say that for every minute you spend meditating, you make at least 10 minutes back, because you're able to focus deeper. You become a better custodian of your attentional space. One of the most remarkable stats that I encountered in all these hundreds of studies that I dug into was that when we do work in front of a computer, we only work on one thing for an average of 40 seconds before we switch to doing something else. And when we have apps like Skype and iMessage and Slack open as we're doing work, that average drops to 35 seconds. And if you think back to your last most productive day, you probably followed through many of these steps. You knew what was important, whether you set an intention or not. You eschewed the distractions that came in. You've brought your focus back to that thing, maybe because you're on a deadline and you had to do that out of necessity. This is our most productive state. And like you said, it's a bit calmer than the book cover might uh, might lead people on to. But at least that'll get them to pick it up, and hopefully the average person out there, maybe they're a bit less receptive to these ideas of slowing down and working more thoughtfully and more meditatively, like you said. But it'll get them in the door, and I think these are ideas that we all need. We need to choose more often what to focus on before we focus on it. It's so simple. It's so elementary, but hardly any of us do it.
Absolutely. Chris,
Sorry,
this has
I
been,
was on a
no,
rant there.
no. You know what? And here's the thing is that you and I could talk about this for hours. And we have in
We
the
could.
past. We've sat in I remember the first time we had a chance to meet was in Ottawa. We were at Zach's Diner in
Zach's
Byward Market.
Diner.
Yep. And we sat and we basically, I think we're there for like what, 2 to 3, like we were there for a couple hours just going,
Yeah.
because first off, there's not many of us that get a chance to get together and do that. And there's not many Canadians that get to do it.
No, not many Canucks that get to do that.
No, there's not many productivity nerds that are Canadians that we know of. If there are some out there, please let me know. But this book will help anybody, whether you are a productivity expert or strategist like me and you, or whether you're just like I need more focus. I need to get through and bust up these distractions. Hyperfocus: How to Be More Productive in a World of Distraction. The book is out now. It came out, yesterday. Chris, where can people pick up the book and where can they learn more and find out more about what you do when you're not, writing books? Because I'm sure you're working on the next one already.
Usually on this meditation cushion or drinking green tea. Yeah. The book is available in bookstores everywhere. It's available in Canada, the US. This is something that I'd encourage folks to do. Is instead of hopping over to Amazon, go to the local retailer that sells books in your area. Because these are great folks that they'll recommend other books that are like it that you might also like, and then you get the serendipitous aspect of it where you run into a book that you never knew existed simply because your eyes gravitated towards it when you were scanning the book. So it's available on Amazon. It's available in bookstores everywhere. It's available on Audible if you like the dulcet, soporific sounds of my voice. But if you don't, then you should pick up the hardcover. If you find me annoying.
or you could say, when will the Canadian accent creep in? When will it creep in? He said
I
a
don't
boot.
know, bud.
He said a boot.
Oh, he said a boot, bud. Oh my, holy boats, Mike, holy boats. So yeah. It's everywhere.
And a life of productivity, right? That's the other.
A life of productivity. I'm so bad at promoting my stuff, but A Life of Productivity is my site where I write a column on productivity, and I'm at Chris_Bailey on Twitter. My publisher made me get a more professional username.
No more wiggle chicken, eh? No more wiggle chicken.
You're listening to the Chris Bailey 2.0, Mike. What do you think?
I like it. I like it. Thanks to Chris for joining me, not just for this Flashback Friday original episode, but for the update as well. You can check out all of the show notes, which include links and so on and so forth, at mikevardy.com/podcast558. Of course, you can also do that wherever you get your podcast, be it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, even YouTube. While you're reading those show notes, you might as well subscribe to the podcast. If you're not already a subscriber, it's a great way to support the show. So make sure you do that. That way you won't miss a single episode of what's to come, can easily search through the archives, and so much more. So again, subscribing to the show, that's a big way to support the show. Another is to check out the sponsors that you heard during the conversation today. Go to mikevardy.com/podcast sponsors, and that way you can see all of the sponsors that are there. You can click on links for those that resonate with you, and that way they know that we sent you in their direction. That's it for this episode of A Productive Conversation, a Flashback Friday episode of A Productive Conversation. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.